Welcome to Interviews with Innocence, a podcast about spirituality, consciousness, and exploring the wisdom our children bring into this world. I believe that our very young children are our greatest teachers. After all, they're the masters of living in the present moment, bubbling in unconditional love, enjoying the messiness of life, and curious about the universe in all its dimensions. The pure essence that young children exhibit lives within all of us. My hope is that these interviews will help us discover, embrace, and connect with the sacred core of childhood that resides within each of our hearts. I am your host, Marla Hughes. Today, I am so excited to have Dr. Debra Diamond on the show. Debra is a natural psychic medium and medical intuitive who was gifted with her abilities as a child. She provides remarkable insights for her clients to assist in healing and expansion. She is a former top-ranked Wall Street money manager, regular CNBC commentator, and former professor at Johns Hopkins University, who left a prominent career to pursue a life of service and spirituality. And she is also a death doula and has written a beautiful book that we'll talk about a little bit in the interview today. So welcome, Debra.
Thank you, Marla. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. So, wow, how did you go from Wall Street manager and professor at Johns Hopkins? Well, the professor makes a little bit of sense, but and getting into mediumship and psychic work and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And when I was in the investment business, I always knew things. I didn't know how I knew these things, but I would be able to pick up an annual report or prospectus, and without reading it, I would know if it would be a good investment. I would know about the management team, the product, the industry. And I didn't know how I knew all these things. And of course, in the investment business, nobody talks about, the word psychic just doesn't come up. So
Right.
it's really a dollars and cents business. So my boss used to say to me, Debra, you have really good instincts. So I just described it to good instincts. That was as far as I went. I didn't think it was anything else. And I, really didn't spend any time thinking about it. And it wasn't until years later I decided to take an intuition development class in New York, a weekend class, because I felt like I had good intuition. It'd be fun to take this class just to tune it up. And I went up to New York for the class. I live on the East Coast, but I went up to New York, and it was a weekend class. And Saturday morning, we did a few exercises, and I was getting everything in these exercises. We did some psychometry and some telepathy. I was getting everything, but I wasn't too concerned because they were pretty low-key exercises.
Mm-hmm.
When we took a break, and when we came back, the teacher said, now we're going to do a seance. And I got a little panicky because I wasn't really there for a seance. And, I picked up the schedule for the day. I didn't see anything there about a seance, but I thought, well, I really don't want to do this. Frankly, I was scared. And then I thought, well, it's only Saturday morning and this class goes through Sunday afternoon. So let me just do this one next exercise, and then we'll go on to the next exercise, and nothing's going to happen. So the teacher said, I'll put you all in a meditative state and then take you out of the meditation. And if you see anything, you see anyone, you let me know and I'll tell you what to do. So I thought, well, that doesn't pertain to me. I'm not going to see anyone. So, we meditated, and she took us out of the meditation. And then she said, does anyone see anything? See anyone? And, we all looked at each other. And then I raised my hand, and she said, yes, Debra, what do you see? And I said, I see about 50 people. These were people who had passed. And some of them were family members of mine. There were loved ones from some of the other students in the room, and then just some random people. I saw a few 42nd Street showgirls kind of prancing through the room. So I was completely overwhelmed. I had no idea what was happening. the teacher said, if you see someone in the corner of the room, chances are they go with someone in the corner. So I said, well, I do see someone in the right corner. And she asked me to describe that person. And he was Hispanic with long, dark hair parted in the middle, big handlebar mustache, white teeth. And as I described him, the woman sitting in that corner began to sob. And she said, I can identify him. That was my fiance. He died 2 years ago. And she asked me if during the break, if she showed me pictures on her cell phone, if I would be able to identify him from the pictures. And I said, sure, because he was just plain as day to me. So during the break, she came over and she flipped through some pictures on her cell phone. And I said, there, that's him. And she said, yes, that's my fiance. And she explained that she had wanted to hear from him. She'd been waiting 2 years to hear from him and had not heard anything from him. So she was very appreciative to me for making this connection. Now, I was totally overwhelmed, but she hugged me and she thanked me. And, you know, I come from Wall Street and there are no thank yous on Wall Street and certainly no hugs.
Yes.
So, you know, I knew I had done something significant for someone. I knew I had done something meaningful, but I was really overwhelmed. So, you know, I spent the rest of the weekend in that class, and all sorts of things were happening. And people were coming up to me and saying, you must have been doing this for a long time. And I said, actually, I've never done this before. So that was sort of how things started for me. It wasn't anything that I was looking for. It was nothing that I wanted. It's not like I grew up thinking, you know, I hope I get to be a psychic medium one day. You know, so not anything I, you know, was seeking, but I didn't tell anybody about that experience because people don't talk about extraordinary experiences. I kept it to myself, but that summer I went off to Taos, New Mexico, where I'd been a number of times in the past. I went out there to paint for the summer because I'm also an artist. And I rented a place for a few months to just go out and paint. At the end of the 2 months, when my lease was up, I knew I wasn't coming back east. I didn't know why, but I knew I was supposed to stay there. So I stayed. And that's where I really began to unpack these gifts that I was given and, you know, really relax about this ability, because in Taos, this sort of thing is kind of normalized. If people ask you, what do you do? And you say, I'm a psychic, they say, oh, me too. So, you know, it's just nobody thinks anything of it. So
Yes.
there's musicians and writers and artists and whatnot. So, so I just didn't think too much about it anymore. And it just became something, you know, I just started doing the practice and eventually teaching and doing readings. And then I came back east eventually because I felt like my time in Taos was done. And I came back thinking, well, I won't be doing this anymore because I'm coming east. And the East Coast is not like Taos. But that's not what happened. When I came back east, I was approached by a woman who'd had a near-death experience. She was 37 years old and had a cardiac arrest in her kitchen and with her little kids while she was making breakfast. And she had an NDE, and she asked me if I would do a reading for her, which I did. And then a friend of hers wanted a reading, and that somebody wanted a workshop. And before I knew it, you know, I was doing this practice on the East Coast. So that's you know how it evolved. I always had this ability. I didn't have the training. You know, I did eventually train at the Arthur Findlay Institute in the UK and other places. But you know, when I was in the investment business, I just had I had the raw material, but not the. It was good enough to do the work. That's for sure. But now, you know, I'm trained in what I do, which, you know, allows me to do readings for people, which is, you know, different than picking up a prospectus and knowing, you know, that the stock's going to be a winner.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's how it came about.
I remember also you talking about your son saying something about, yeah, could you share that?
Yeah, of course. So I have 3 sons, and they're all pretty left brain, you know, sober people that, you know, in, you know, high profile professions, but they're open minded. Anyway, on my way home from New York, I called my youngest son, who's a Duke MBA. So that'll give you an idea of like how his brain works. It's
Mhm.
very left brain. And I called him and I told him what happened in this class. And he didn't say anything. He listened. And when I was all done, he said, well, that makes sense. We're just energy and the energy has to go somewhere.
Wow.
And it was something I could understand, putting it in that context, something that, he was saying that what happened was a cross between science and spirituality. And that made sense to me.
Right.
And I've used that explanation, that we are energy and everything is energy. I use that now all the time to understand these phenomena.
Mhm. That's interesting. I bet that wasn't something you expected to come from him, that he had ever really thought.
Yeah, no, actually, no, I did. I mean, I not particularly that explanation, but he listens to a lot of stuff and usually synthesizes it down to one sentence. He's good at that.
Right, right, great. So I know that you work now as a death doula, which you sit at the bedside of people who are usually going to pass within the next 24 hours, or that's what supposedly you think. And you're also a medium. So can you tell us a little bit about that work and some of the things that you've just, a few stories that have just kind of amazed you? I don't think I've never had I know you're different than a hospice worker, but I've never had someone like yourself who's actually sat at the bed of someone actively dying. And so, can you talk about that, please?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a death doula. Not everyone is familiar with what a death doula is, so I'll just briefly explain
Great.
the idea. So I think many people have heard of birth doulas, and they help women. They help usher life into the world, and death doulas help usher life out. Um, so the idea of keeping vigil at end of life is nothing new. It's been around for thousands of years, but it's more recently been institutionalized into this idea of being a death doula, sitting bedside at hospice with the dying. And I had wanted to do this work because when my mother passed away in 2001, we had hospice come to help. And at one point, one of the hospice professionals handed me a piece of paper and said, you might want to read this. And I thought, well, that probably has to do with medication or, something. So I set it aside. But eventually, when I picked it up, um, I read it. It said, if the body's ready and the soul isn't, you don't leave. And if the soul is ready and the body isn't, you don't leave. But if the soul's ready and the body's ready, then you leave. So
Wow.
I, that really struck me. I found that to be just kind of remarkable because this hospice professional was saying death is a process, it involves body and soul. And up until then, I'd always thought of death as something like straight out of the movies, something very dramatic with the heavens opening up and all the secrets of the universe being revealed. And it's not like that. It's a process like birth. So I knew I wanted to be of service at hospice. I knew I wanted to do something. And I felt like I could be a death doula who sat bedside with the actively dying. And actively dying means within 24 to 48 hours, although, um, you know, clinicians don't always get that right because,
Mhm.
there's a body and a soul involved. So
Right.
that's why sometimes if you walk into the room of someone who, looks like they're barely hanging on and they've been looking like that for weeks, they're not ready to leave yet, so even though their body looks like that, their soul, is not there yet. So, sitting bedside with the actively dying, while it means technically the last 24 to 48 hours, they could be there for weeks. And sitting with the actively dying means that these people are not responsive, but they are conscious. So I think many people, if they've had a loved one at hospice or the hospital, or they've been with someone at end of life, they they may think, you walk into the room and you look at the person lying there hooked up to, various machines, possibly. And it looks like nobody's home, and it's kind of frightening, but there's actually a lot more going on at end of life than we can
Mhm.
see, so it's happening in this invisible world. And because I am a medium, I'm able to see into this other space, and I do, at end of life. So I um, I see people at end of life. They're very much out of their bodies. They are, as we discussed earlier before we started talking on the air, they are journeying. They're out of their bodies as they are transitioning. And they're in the, they sort of go back and forth between being in their body and being out of their body. And when they're out of their body, they may be journeying to the other dimension. They may be seeing fantastic landscapes. They may be visiting favorite memories from when they were a child. They may be seeing loved ones or, relatives on the other side. I mean, there's any number, or visiting their new home on the other side. There's any number of things that they could be doing. And when they're doing that, they are out of body. They are not in pain, and they feel good. I mean,
Yeah.
they are in that, traveling in that higher dimension where they're just pure energy, and they feel good. Their physical body is still lying there, but their etheric body is, in this other dimension. And they go back and forth between the journeying and then kind of being in their body. And what the most profound thing that I've learned about, what happens at end of life, is something that builds on my work with near death experiencers. I wrote a book called Life After Near Death, and I worked with many near death experiencers who had extraordinary after effects as a result of their near death experience. And the reason they have these after effects is because they come back. They also journey. Near death experiencers, they journey. They're out of body, and every time they journey, when they journey, they are out in the universe, and they appear to sort of get tanked up at the universal filling station. I don't know how else to describe it, but they're out there, and they come back with like a little bit more consciousness, which is why these people have these extraordinary abilities, including psychic and mediumistic abilities, or healing abilities, or high vibration abilities like music or math. So how do we explain that? Well, they're coming back with their energy altered. They come back with more consciousness, and they appear to come back with more consciousness than they started out with. So I see a similar thing at end of life. Every time the actively dying are traveling outside of their body, they go out into the universe or wherever they're going, and they come back with a little bit more consciousness, each time that they're
Right.
traveling. But unlike near death experiencers, they are out of body multiple times. With a near death experience, they go out of their body, they have their near death experience, and then they come back. That's it. But at end of life, there are multiple journeys. So uh, each time they journey, they come back with more consciousness at the same time that their physical body may be declining. So it appears that at end of life, their consciousness is blossoming while their physical body is declining.
Right.
Now, I have a friend who's a hospice chaplain, and I was telling her about this. And, when I told her, she said, I know exactly what you mean. She said, because now hospice chaplains are talking to patients from the moment they come in the door, unlike a death doula who's only interacting with the actively dying, and the actively dying aren't usually talking. So, but she talks to these people, and she said, they tell me about their journeying, they tell me about their traveling. And she said, every time they come back, they're a little different.
Right.
Yeah. And, when I've given talks about my book, Diary of a Death Doula, um, and oftentimes there are many doulas in the audience, they, when I talk about this, they are all nodding along. They all know what I'm talking
Mhm.
about. So it's something, of course, that, we can't prove. We don't have the language, we don't have the science, to measure out of body experiences. But anecdotally, this is information that I can share, and it seems to make sense. But it's what you're working with what's available.
Right, right. Well, it seems that, boy, there are like millions of near-death experience stories now, coming out. And I've interviewed quite a few, and you're right, they come up back, usually not a little bit changed, but transformed. I mean, they leave jobs and they just, completely transformed. And I think that just speaks so loudly. I mean, the experience in itself is amazing, the stories, but the point that their lives change so dramatically is just, I think, speaks really loudly.
Yeah. Well, and that's the definition of a near death experience, the fact that they come back transformed, unable to go back to their previous life. It's not how many, after effects they have, or how
Right.
many, if they went through the tunnel or the light. As a matter of fact, many NDEers that I talk to are often embarrassed because they say, they whisper to me, they say, I didn't go through a tunnel. I didn't see
Right,
the
right,
light. I probably didn't have a legitimate experience. And you don't need to have every single one of those elements to have a near death experience.
right.
So, um, but you're right. There are millions and millions of people who've had NDEs. I mean, it's a topic that wasn't discussed too much years ago, and now all of a sudden people are coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
These spiritually transformative experiences and extraordinary experiences are much more common than I think most people realize. I think many people have them, but they don't like to talk about them for fear of ridicule or being embarrassed. But if they did talk about them, I think they would find that there are many people who share these,
Yeah.
who have them, and it would be great if people would talk about them.
It's, and I think it's the same for a lot of even the spiritually transformative experiences. And with children, seeing spirit, invisible friends, or remembering a past life, remembering choosing parents. And I think it's so incredibly common and celebrated back centuries ago, or even in our indigenous cultures today. But in the Western world, it's just, it's unfortunately it's downplayed, or presented as just imagination. And so if all those things, I think, as all those things get out there in the world, even though it's anecdotal, science is really getting involved now too, which is really beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons that um, it's not been normalized, these experiences, is that in our Western world, we very much believe in science, and
Hmm.
science kind of rules rules our world, and they have done they've contributed many wonderful projects, but um, in the Eastern cultures, I think there's always been a respect for these long held spiritual beliefs, and it's just not as much part of the Western culture. What I think is very interesting is, under the circumstances that the whole world is under right now with COVID, there's, I think, a huge transformation that's taking place,
Yes.
collective transformation. As a matter of fact, yesterday I was walking with my son, the one who had talked to me years ago about this, what happened in this class in New York. We were walking, and I said, it's really funny. I've been walking for years, and I always wondered where all the people were. How come nobody else is walking? And now you go for a walk, and like everybody's walking. So
Right.
walking is a form of meditation. So, you've got people, everybody's out there walking, i.e., everybody is meditating.
Mm,
And, all the requirements that you need for spiritual transformation have now been enforced on us: solitude, simple practices, um, isolation, all sorts of
yeah.
things that
Being
are
out in
required.
nature
Yeah,
instead of
yeah,
being in
all of
big crowds.
yeah, yeah, all of that, being cut off. So, and it's happening all around the world.
Mhm.
And, these are transformational kinds of experiences. And I think that, in a few years, you'll start to see the results of this. And I think it should be really interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, Deborah, are you when talking about the soul and the body? I love that pamphlet said that in the one that the person gave you from the hospice. And when you're sitting with the actively dying, do you actually like see deceased loved ones in the room, or you feel the energy, or what are some of the things that happen?
I do see deceased loved ones in pretty much all the rooms. It seems to be fairly standard. They come in to provide, I believe, support and comfort, and also some form of like legacy, I think, to the dying.
Legacy.
And the dying know that they're there. They know it, and they recognize it. And I think many people, besides myself, have had these experiences of sitting bedside with the dying, and the dying will have a conversation, but you only hear half of it. They'll
Right.
say something, and then they pause, and that's when the loved one in spirit is talking, and then they respond, and then they pause. So you can only hear part of the conversation. Because I'm a medium, I'm able to see these loved ones in spirit, and I have conversed with them. Um, there was one room that I was in, and there was the mother of the patient along with her sister, um, who were there. And I said to her, "What? Why are you here?" And she said, "This is what we do." She said, "It's when you cross over, this is like an assignment that you're given." I mean, I think of it as like high class jury duty. I, like some civic responsibility. You cross
Right.
over, and this is like what you do. And she said, "We would never turn it down. I mean, this is what you do." And I said, "Well, how do you know when to come in?" And she said, "Well, it's sort of like you have speed dial on your phone, you have memory on your phone. And, so those on the other side are energy. They can appear seamlessly, at any time. It's not like they
Right.
have to travel halfway around the world. I mean, they're just their energy. So they
Right.
know there's some sort of, I guess, call that goes out, and they get it. Of course, they know everything on the other side. They see
Yeah.
everything that's going on with us. So, and then they appear, and they're in those rooms, and then also they, uh, accompany the dying, as they cross over, and that's
Right.
whether that seems to be true whether you're in hospice or hospital or at home, or if you die from trauma, because that's a question that I get a lot. What about someone who dies tragically from, an automobile accident, or, something that happens very quickly.
Mhm.
And I've always seen in those circumstances that the dying, when they're out of body, somebody always seems to appear from the other side instantly to help them cross over.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that is beautiful. Have you worked, and I really can't think of a better job to have when you're on the other side than to come over and help your loved ones transition. Have you worked any as a death doula with the young?
No, no.
You haven't.
Uh-uh.
Yeah. Because I always wonder if I don't just wonder, I truly believe that if somehow we could teach our children, we're all it seems as if our generation's becoming so interested in all of these, spirituality and the afterlife and all the things that we're talking about right now. And if we could, as a young person, instead of having so much fear around when someone passes, if instead we could embrace it really as you have, and to teach a child about energy, and that you can still connect, and it wouldn't be really in a religious way. It could be a supplement to a religion, to a religion, I guess. but just to take away that fear and know that that person isn't lost. How do you feel about that?
Well, I agree with you. I think that one of the reasons that there's so much fear about end of life and death, really, I think it's because of the medical establishment. I mean, for
Hmm.
thousands of years, thousands, death was part of life. You know, if you go back to the Egyptians 5,000 years ago, the oldest civilization on earth, they believed in the afterlife, and everything that you did during your life, was also, they also viewed that as sort of part of your journey into the afterlife. Things were weighed and measured, and there's, of course, they had the Book of the Dead that describes the journey that people made to the afterlife. It was part of their life, and the same was true for other civilizations, the Incas, the Mayans, the Mesopotamians, and for many of the ancient cultures, death was just a continuation.
Yes.
um, and even here in our Western culture, up until maybe the Victorian age, people died at home, surrounded by their loved ones. And in the Victorian age, they would, put you in the parlor and, take pictures, because cameras had just been developed. So they would take pictures of you with your loved one who had passed. And death was part of life. It wasn't until we start to get to modern medicine where people are whisked away to hospitals and hospice and hooked up to machines, and it's a very antiseptic kind of clinical environment, and I think that's what really strikes fear into the heart of people. All of
Right.
a sudden the soul has been removed from death. It's just become this clinical process, and so I think that's part of the issue now. People are, I think, starting to respond to that, and there seem to be some movements afoot now to talk about death and do it a different way. And I think that that's partially because of the our generation, who um the boomers, they're always like trying to figure out how we can do something better.
Right.
Now
Right.
it's like, how can we do death better?
Right.
So, so I think some of that means people are electing to die at home, or have, talk about green burials, or, the certain rituals at end of life, to make it a little bit less clinical and more spiritual, more personal.
Absolutely. And even look at healing in Western culture. I think we're waking up that science, of course, is very important, but it's definitely missing a part because with the rampant onset of everything that's going on in this world, we need more than more medicine. We need healing of the heart. And I have a series coming up on actually shamans and plant medicine, and we talk a lot about that. And so I think we're starting to go in that energy healing, Reiki, seeing more of that too. Do you see that some in your profession?
Well, there's definitely been a rising tide of interest in all of these things. I mean, there are
Yeah.
people who come to me now who never would have been, who never would have come to a psychic or a medium years ago. And there seems to be some conversion taking place where ordinary people are now being imbued for various reasons with this enhanced spirituality, and they're seeking, and they want to be of service, and they have, this higher vibration. I just think more and more people are going through transformation. And
Yes.
but I
Yes.
think what we've seen up to now is just a slice of what's happening. What will be happening going forward. I mean,
Absolutely.
oh, this is just unprecedented in so many ways. I mean, beyond all the obvious ways, I just think spiritually, this is we're heading into a whole new age.
Yeah. So let's just briefly talk a little bit about your book, Diary of a Death Doula. And I love that. I don't remember what the numbers were, but I know at one point you're talking about just the importance of knowing that there's something bigger, bigger than ourselves. And can you just elaborate on that a little bit and how you feel like if more people would would not just believe that, but just kind of live that, how that would look in the world.
I'm not sure I followed that.
Oh, I'm sorry. And one of the things that I think there are 25.
25 lessons, uh-huh.
Yes, yes. And one of the lessons was believing that, there was a bigger force than ourselves in the
Oh, uh-huh.
world.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And just can you talk just briefly about why why that was important for you to put in the book?
Right. So I think when you're dealing with these issues of life and death, because that's really what if you're a death doula, that's really what you're doing. Um, it has a profound effect on you, and um, you see what's really important, and
Yes,
um,
yes.
yeah, and you go to a different level and a different depth of understanding. And I mean, there's so much that we'll never understand, about death. I think I've been shown just a very minute slice of what happens at end of life, but these other dimensions and what unfolds at end of life there's still a big mystery about it, because as I
Yeah,
said earlier, we don't have the language or the science yet to understand all of this.
right,
But I do believe that there are greater forces at work than we know of. We have our own ways of trying to understand that, and through spirituality and various practices and whatnot, we can try to wrap our heads around it, or but still, so much of it eludes us, um, because it's another dimension with another language and another. It just we can't apply our principles to it, because
right.
it's just not the same environment.
Yeah,
But I see all the time in all of my work that, there are greater forces at work. We like to think that we control everything, but I think that at the end of the day, there's very little that we actually control. I just think that there are bigger forces that are at work. And, when you try to go against them, I think oftentimes they steer you back to where you should be. And,
right,
and then there are people who accept that and go with it. And there are people who, just insist on doing it their way. And, and that's what life is about. It's a journey, and, there are lessons for all of us.
right,
But,
right.
but I do believe that there are greater forces at work. Yeah. More powerful forces at work. And if you listen, and if you pay attention, um, they will make themselves known to you. And then the challenge is to follow that guidance. So when
Mhm.
they say turn left, go left, or when they say turn right, go right. It's complicated.
Yeah. Okay, Deborah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I so appreciate it. And I just want the listeners to know that your book is amazing. So, please run out and get it. There's so much wonderful information in it. So if people want to find you, where would they do that?
Right. So, they can contact me through my website, DebraDiamondAuthor.com. That's Debra, and diamond like a diamond ring, Diamond,
Mhm.
DebraDiamondAuthor.com. I also have a YouTube channel, and I do teaching on that channel and speaking, so they can subscribe to that. Um, and they could sign up for my newsletter. If you go on my website, you could sign up for my newsletter. I only send it out if I have news, so I don't inundate people with
Great,
it.
great.
But there's a lot of inspirational information in the newsletter, so that's always nice. I think people really appreciate that. I do give readings, and psychic and mediumship readings, and they can contact me for those through my website as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways. And my books, Diary of a Death Doula, 25 Lessons the Dying Teach Us About the Afterlife, and Life After Near Death is another book I've written. And those are available at bookstores. I don't know how many bookstores are open right now, but they're also available online at Amazon. So, please read them. And if you enjoy them, please leave a review. And, I'm always happy to hear from people to hear their comments.
Right. Well, thank you so much. You're doing what a wonderful career to help people transition and being support for the families. So you're doing amazing things. So thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us today.
My pleasure, Marla. Thank you so much. And congratulations on all your wonderful work.
Oh, thank you. You have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about the show, you can find us at interviewswithinnocence.com and on Facebook or Instagram at Interviews with Innocence. Please write me a message, tell me what you liked, and let me know what else you would like to hear. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating and review. It helps other listeners find the show. Thank you.